Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to tell you about this sword right here. This is the single-edged arming sword from Windlass, among the Royal Armories line of things. And before I get into the video, some disclaimers. One, this is a review sample. I didn't spend any money on it. If you think that makes me biased, you know at the start. You should also know I picked this sword sort of. I wanted something from the Royal Armories line. The long swords, when I was talking to Windlass, were out of stock. This one was in stock and didn't have a wheel pommel, so I picked this one. But you should know that I had some hand in picking what I was sent, and if you think that influences my bias in some way, you also know. The last bit you should know, and it'll be obvious when you see me move, I don't study HEMA. I do study other kinds of swordsmanship, but I don't fancy myself an expert. I'm a guy that just likes to take some of these swords and whack things in his backyard, like water bottles and the like, and if that's useful or not, I guess at least you know at the start. The point of this video and what you should expect to see as well is I will cover the bits and bobs, fits and features, and then I will cut some stuff with it, and then I will give you my final thoughts, and hopefully the chatter along the way is useful in helping you decide if it's worth your money or not. What I'm not going to do in this video is, one, talk about the history behind this sword, which is a really important facet because this is a recreation of a historical sword in a museum. It's got context and nuance and stuff that is interesting about it. I'll compare it a little bit to the photos since it's supposed to be a recreation. I'll give my impersonation of if I think they've hit the mark or not. But Matt Easton does a much better job of talking about the history, kind of the goal behind it. I encourage you to check out his video. It's linked in the description down below if you're interested in that facet of things. The other bit you should know, though, is I'm not going to break it. And that's typically my shtick with a lot of swords. In this particular case, one, I frankly don't have time and it's cold and I don't want to. But two, I don't think geared toward a person that's going to be doing really heavy cutting and whacking into bottles and hard targets and stuff. I could be wrong on that. If I am, throw it in the commentary down below. I'm not opposed to revisiting a destructive test at a later point. I just don't have time to do it right now. And it's a really cool sword. I have enough to talk about it and to hopefully give some people some more information because I don't think this one gets as much attention as it should. And it's a very interesting sword. So without further ado, I'm going to move on with the bits and bobs and fits and features. Now I'm going to start with the end of the pommel, the peen right here. And what I can tell you is the peen has some misplaced hammer marks on it. There's some tool markings and things like that. There's been an attempt to clean them up and kind of sand them over, I guess I should say, but you can still see that there were a few missed spots while they were peening it down. Do I care about that for $500? No. I've seen that on swords that are far more expensive than this. It's not really a bother, especially since it's been sanded down in such a way where nothing grabs me. If I want to be handsy with the pommel, if I want to turn it like a doorknob for whatever reason, it does not scratch my hand or provide me any discomfort. I've dropped the pommel, incidentally, a few times as well. Well, not the pommel, the whole sword, the sword with the pommel, and it's got some pings and dings, but it's held up against concrete, I guess, reasonably well. The facets on it have a little bit of canter wobble. They're not perfectly symmetrical. There's an element of human and hand done here. But what I like as well is that while they look reasonably crisp, they are not sharp. So if I, again, try to turn this like a doorknob, nothing hurts my hand, nothing grabs my skin. In a glove or bare hands, it's quite comfortable. It is a very dominating looking pommel, but this is, again, a recreation of a historic piece, and it's done reasonably proportional. So this is the way that original sword was made, and I will say it grows on me. It looks like it dominates the hilt a little bit. Visually, it's a little off to my eye. At the same time, I have grown to like it. And ergonomically, if I hold this, it fits in the kind of meat of my hand without pushing into it like wheel pommels often do. From an ergonomic and usability perspective, it's quite comfortable. Moving on to the transitions between the pommel and the grip, there's a little bit of buffing compound, I guess, that is what I see. Now, if I was real picky, I could get under there with a toothpick and pick it out, but I'm not gonna. I'm just noting that it's there. Is it a big deal? Nope. No, it's not. The transition, though, is really quite good. Sometimes the pommel overlaps things. Sometimes the grip overlaps things in a way that is distasteful. Here, it's done exceptionally well. This is a very high quality grip. I can make out very little in the seam. There's very little compound. There's no jutting ledges poking out or anything like that. It looks really, really well designed, really well executed. And yeah, I'm just very surprised. This is not the conventional Windlass experience that I have. This is really quite well done. Which brings us up to the grip in general, and there's a lot to unpack here. It has dimension. It tapers down quite thin towards the crossguard. It bulbouses up and becomes more roundish towards the pommel area. The result of that is it fills your hand quite well. Now your top two fingers rest between these risers which are on here. They look really nice. It's a little busy, but at the same time, the way they interact with your hands gives you some additional purchase, some additional traction on here. The thin part of the grip up here, it doesn't overlap the crossguard or anything like that. Visually, I think it works quite well. but it just lets you index. It fits right between your knuckles. You know exactly where the edge is. It also has this kind of octagonal, hexagonal shape to it. There's lines and dimensions and risers and kind of a texture from the cord wrap that they might have bound it in or might be underneath here. And it's just really well done. Was not expecting it to be this nice from a Windlass product for $500. I will admit this is really quite nice. Now there is a little bit of a ledge that I can get my finger under the leather. What that means is eventually it might peel, but as I pick at it, sometimes it will peel right away as I do this. That isn't happening here. It hasn't happened throughout me using it, dropping it. I haven't really abused it exactly, at least intentionally, but it's held up, I guess I should say. The grip is overall, I think, really well done. Matt Easton mentioned that he had to take some artistic license here because the grip is obviously not on the original sword. I think he's done an excellent job. This is not only visually very appealing, it blends well with the sword. The risers give me a sense that somebody thought about what would feel good for this sword in the hand. What would a person want to feel, and made it happen. So well done, Matt. Well done, Windlass. If this was, I don't know that I would have had the idea to do this exactly, but tip of my hat to you, because I couldn't think of anything better, any improvements that I would want to make. Some people might want a different color or something like that, but I really like the overall design and execution here. Now, as I move up to the crossguard area, again, the transitions, I don't make out the same compound or anything like that, and it meets up with the crossguard quite well. Matt mentioned that he's captured some asymmetry in the grip. I don't notice it exactly, other than like the grip on this particular one kind of cants backwards a little bit. So not only is it off center, but it also cants backwards a little bit. So it holds a bit like a chef knife or something almost. But I don't notice a ton of asymmetry here. The edges are rounded. It has these little hooks that cant up. There's a little bit of tool marking and some unfinished bits around the edge. Not necessarily something that I'm complaining about, but the grip has dimension. It thins down. It has a little bit going on. Not a whole lot. The pommel is a lot more intricate, a lot more interesting visually, but the crossguard, it's a crossguard. I like that it's not overbuilt. I like that it also matches the original. It's, again, trying to recreate something that is in the museum. They've done that here. So any subjective things that I say about would I like it to be this or that are kind of irrelevant here, because the goal is to recreate a thing in the museum. From the photos I see, it looks like they've done that reasonably well. The other bit to note is the gap in the crossguard, and this looks like it has relatively small tolerances. There are some gaps in there, but they're much smaller than I typically see on Windlass product. So there's a little bit more around the edge area, but along the back, it's relatively tight. I don't know how close this is to the original. I don't see that angle on the original, but from a reproduction standpoint, in a $500 sword, this is very acceptable to me. I like to see these tolerances tight. I like to see no gaps personally, but it's not really a thing that impacts performance. It was done both ways historically. The blade seems well seated in the crossguard. The crossguard has relatively small tolerances for stuff and schmutz and water and whatnot to get in there. So I'm quite happy with the overall presentation here. The next bit I'll talk about is the scabbard before moving on to the blade. It is a wood core leather wrap scabbard. The leather seems about the same as what I typically see on Windlass. It doesn't feel like a crappy quality of leather overall. It doesn't move. So sometimes if I push on scabbards that are wood core, the leather displaces. They're not glued down particularly well. It looks like it is stitched and has a seam along the back. It has little flaps up at the top to protect from rain, and the mouth of the scabbard has been painted or coated with something where at least it doesn't look like wood. There is a bronze or brass shape at the end, and it's a handsome looking piece. Now, I don't particularly like the brass shape with the silver fittings. I like it to be kind of one uniform color, but I'm not complaining. I don't think there was any original material, so Matt had to make some judgments on how the scabbard should look. And it's also $500 on a sword that comes with the scabbard. The scabbard does do less than desirable things, like the sword will kind of slide out, but there's some tension there. It's not a ton, but it's there. And if you have a belt or harness system, maybe you could tighten it up. I guess it's probably easier to make it tighter than looser. It does have a little bit of rattle, so it's not the best fit scabbard that I've seen, but at the same time, it's a $500 sword that comes with a scabbard that does scabbardy things reasonably well and is also not hot garbage. Sometimes $500 swords come with a scabbard that's more like a shipping container than a scabbard. This, while it leaves a little bit to be desired, is still reasonably clean, a reasonable way to hold and display the sword, a reasonable thing to carry it around in should you choose. It might require a little tweaking, but at the same time, it's certainly far from the worst thing that I've seen. I should also note, before I move on to the blade, that the packing that the sword came in was different than I typically see in Windlass. It came with a nice blue box, a certificate of authenticity, a cloth with some wax to polish the sword. It was definitely at a higher tier. Like when you open it up, you feel like you're really getting something. For $500, again, this is a little bit of a surprise. All of that stuff generally doesn't matter to me. I take the swords out. I don't generally keep the boxes, but I will say they did a very solid job. If you're looking to give one of these as a gift, it comes in a nice box. And if you wanted to keep that box as a display piece, it's not the ugliest thing out there either. So they've done a good job with the overall presentation of things as well. Now, onto the blade. I will note that this sword did not come sharpened to me. So I ordered it. I forgot to ask to sharpen it. So that means I had to do that myself. And I mucked it up pretty good. So the photos I have before I started cutting with it are from before it was sharpened. You're not going to see an edge on it. The edge that's on it is one that I put on it with a belt sander. And I am clumsy when it comes to doing that kind of stuff. But I got an edge on there that I felt did a serviceable job. Now, the blade itself is more or less like a falchion. So the blade, as you notice on the handle, is a little bit off center. And that makes your wrist a little bit more in line with the point. It's a little bit more like a falchion or a messer, which is something I'm quite comfortable with. And it also, Matt mentioned like it has a hexagonal cross section. There is a center ridge here, ever so slightly, that's been almost rounded over. It's almost like a lenticular cross section, but it looks like they started with almost a center ridge or a hexagonal cross section and then kind of rounded it down a little bit. So there is vestiges of a center ridge or a hexagonal pattern there, but at the same time, it's more or less a big wedge shape. It has no sharpening about 2/3 up the blade on the spine. It's sharpened on the edge, and then the back edge is one that I sharpened, though to a lesser degree. Came with a reasonable point on it. I've marred that up a little bit by using it. So the blade just has a little bit going on. It's quite thin. So I'll put dimensions in the description down below, but it starts out pretty thin and then thins out even more. It has a bend that's in the top third, but almost up towards the tip here. And it has like a lot of jiggle. It's not a particularly rigid sword. You can thrust with it, but it certainly feels like it's made to do cutting a little bit more. Now, in terms of visuals, it also came reasonably nice. I didn't notice a lot of surface rippling. It's absolutely there, but oftentimes Windlass are hand-forged objects. I understand this one is as well. And when I look down them, it looks like somebody threw rocks in a pond. There's so many ripples. This is much cleaner than the other Windlass swords that I've had. It's more expensive, but it's quite a bit cleaner. It's certainly a better done product. And I like the attention to distal taper and dynamics of the sword. It also feels very different than other Windlass products that I've held. This was one of the first swords from Windlass, the Royal Armories one that I took out of the box. And right away I was like, oh, they can really do really detailed work if they want to. I've had a number of Windlass swords in my collection. A lot of times they feel overbuilt, more stout than they should be. This is not that at all. It feels very light, nimble, and fun in the hand. Now, I'm going to move on to the dynamic section. Moving it around, this is just a joy. Like I said, from almost every aspect, the way it locks in my hand. I like that it doesn't have a wheel pommel on it. It doesn't jam in my wrist or eat at the flub of my hand. It moves really well. I feel like I can be controlled and get the point where I want to. It also feels like I'm exactly connected to the edge the way this grip is designed, and I can get it exactly where I want it to go, which I was able to throw a few decent cuts at with this, and despite my unfamiliarity with this weapon in particular, it wasn't problematic to hit what I was aiming at, which is a surprising challenge for me at times. Anyway, that I suppose brings me on to the cutting side of things. I haven't done much in the way of durability testing here. I've mostly cut bottles and the like and that kind of stuff, which is primarily what I honestly intend to do with this sword. Obviously, you could do more with it, but that's not what I'm going to do. I took it out, I cut some bottles and whatnot with it, and it just sang right through it. It also has a nice little ring to it. Every time you get a good cut, that rings out at you, and it's a pleasant noise to hear that you've thrown a cut reasonably well, and the sword is singing to you as a congratulations for not screwing it up. Also, I cut with my son. He was watching me cut water bottles and stuff from a safe distance, and he was able to come over and throw the sword out. And what that means is I'm I'm obviously, when I hand this to a 3-year-old, and I'm not really handing it to a 3-year-old, but he's holding it, I have a very limited range of motion, and I'm trying to be very controlled here. And I feel like I can do that with this sword. It doesn't take a lot of energy to start it. I'm holding his little hands under mine, so if I'm throwing it out there, I don't want to crush his hands by holding onto it too tight. At the same time, I have to be in complete control because it's a razor blade as tall as he is. So it just shows that I'm able to execute these cuts in a squatted position without generating a lot of force. This has the geometry with the even crappy edge that I put on it to do a very solid job cutting. It is a, at least if you're doing light targets and the like, it's really quite good at cutting. Now, I haven't taken it to tatami, but if I did, I'm very confident that this would be probably one of the better cutters in terms of swords. It's very thin, very light, and if I got an even keener edge on it, this would be a very, very compelling single-handed cutting sword. Now, I say all that because I think this sword is a solid contender for people that want to do backyard cutting, or maybe at one point join some cutting competition or something like that and want to practice with a sword that's going to do a little bit of the work for them. So this is a little bit of an easy button in terms of cutting, provided you can get a very solid edge on it. It seems to do a little bit of the work. And it also has a grip that you feel immediately connected to. It also doesn't rub into the flub of your hands or anything like that. It's a very solid and well-tuned instrument to do these kind of choppy cuts. And so if that's what you're after, then this is a very, very fun sword to do that with. All right, sword friends, that is the extent of the useful information that I have. You've seen close-ups of the bits and bobs. You've seen me move it around. You've seen me cut some stuff with it. Hopefully at this point, you know if it's worth your hard-earned money or not, or at least have a better idea. At this point, though, I got to answer the question myself. Do I personally think it's worth the $500? Yes, is the probably very unsurprising answer here. I think this is an excellent sword for $500. I'm surprised that it's $500. It feels like a sword, which is not something you always get for $500. It has a nice visual appeal to it, which is, again, something that you seldom get one and then the other as well. I think aesthetically, it's quite well put together. It seems like a good product. It came in a nice box and all that kind of stuff, which I honestly don't care much about. But if you do, it also is elevated in that aspect. And 3, it's a reasonable reproduction of an actual historic sword. It's not some guy's take on what looks like a sword and kind of maybe feels like one. It's as close to a 1-for-1 as Windlass is able to muster for $500. And I think they've done an absolutely excellent job here. Now, are there things that are not quite the way that it's supposed to be? More than likely. As I examine the photo from the original, my handle seems to be canted off slightly different than the original does. But generally speaking, it seems like a very, very close approximation of the original, and Matt Easton is involved. I have some faith that the original dynamics and intent are probably pretty close in what I'm feeling here. I could be wrong on that, but if nothing else, it's an incredibly fun sword to move around. Those things I think are all being done really quite well, and the fact that you can get them for $500 is really surprising. If this were $800 or $900 or $1,000, I might question if it's better to get a different sword. But at $500, this feels like, well, a fantastic value. You get a sword, a scabbard, something that looks nice, something that moves nice. And honestly, the sword being off-center, being a little non-standard would be something that would not generally be something I would choose to spend my own money on. But this is absolutely one that if I didn't have one already, this would be something that I would go out and buy. This is a lot of fun. It's a great value, but it also is just really fun to move around, really fun to cut with. As a person that likes European style swords, but isn't studying anything particular with them, I really like the way this one feels in my hand, and it does the things I want to do with a European sword quite well. It looks good on my wall, and as a conversation piece, I can talk about it being from the Royal Armories and, a replica of a thing. It has some element of history, an opportunity for me to learn about a thing, and I can go in the backyard and whack stuff with it, and it's fun. It moves around through things. It does a lot of the work for me, and it's just a fun thing to cut with. If other people are around here wanting to cut with stuff, this is one that I will bring out and set on the table once I unshitify the edge a little bit more than I have. It's just an absolute fun sword, one that you pick up and makes you smile. And it does a lot of things, I think, for $500. I think it's an absolutely great value. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Hopefully you found the video interesting. That is all I got. I want to offer, again, a special tip of my hat and thanks to Windlass for sending this sword my way to review. I have a few other swords from Windlass to review. You'll see them in the future. That genuinely is all I got. Cheers, and thanks for watching.